In this episode of PJ and the Beard, we're back into the Carl Martin pedalboard build that we're doing. And in this episode, we're just going to look real quick at the Squareplugs that were used as part of this series. And so I'm going to go through the different types of plugs I used and maybe even solder together a cable. Now I want to say right off the bat, this isn't expert advice on how to solder a cable. There's lots of videos out there on how to solder these. And how to solder in general. And plus maybe you have a friend that you could tap into, somebody you could go to give you good advice. Say I tapped into Dave Barber a little bit, but don't hold anything that you see here against him. Because what I quickly found out is there's a lot more I don't know than what I do know. But in general, the whole point is just to show that this is not an impossible task to do. And it's a good skill to pick up. And the more you do it, the better at it you get. And if you can solder your own cables, you can solder guitar pots, you can solder pickups. It becomes a really useful skill for anybody who has this kind of hobby going on. So with that, we're going to jump into it and check out the different Squareplugs that I used in this build. All right, so what you're looking at here is kind of my work table, really the kitchen table with a whole bunch of stuff on it. And so let's talk about it. I used 4 different plugs. All right, so for the guitar cables I built, for the patch cables, I used, all of these are from Squareplug. So for the guitar cables, I used the SP400, which is a right angle plug, and it's really compact and it's nice, so you can get it in the nice tight spaces. And then I also used Squareplug's barrel plug, which looks like this. All right. And then I had 2 other ends. One was the SP550S, which is this one right here, which looks just like the Squareplug for the guitar cables. The only difference is it's a TRS plug, so I was able to build some TRS cables. And then the other one is the SPS6, which looks just like the barrel plugs. Only difference is it's a TRS cable. So a little different inside, and maybe I can pop those open and show them to you before this ends. So some tips and tricks, things that I picked up that really were helpful to me as I went through this. First thing I did when I was doing this project is before I started making my cables, I would open up all of these. So I'd take all the screws out and take all the backs off, just so I had them ready to go. So let me do that real quick. All right, so that one's open. And then on the barrel plugs, I just back the screws out so you don't see them in the hole there. That way, I can still fit it over a cable, but I don't have to try and thread those little screws back in. Now, the other thing I'm going to do is not unscrew this back totally off, because I want to remind myself when it comes time to solder this onto the cable that I have to remember to put that on the cable before I do that. So I kind of leave that together. All right, so use a Megami 2314 cable. And the first step would be to remove, the outside shield here. And so we found that this Irwin tool works really well for that. All you got to do, and there was some speculation on whether it would or not, but it does. Stick it in, clamp it, stick it in, clamp it. Both ends done. That simple. So the next thing is to take this shielding and kind of push it away from that center conductor and wrap it all to one side, and then kind of twist it into a nice tight twist. I guess I was taking the cable jacket off. I'm sorry if some of my terminology for these things is not the best. So we got both sides, we've taken it, twisted it. Now I'm going to use this other Irwin tool, and I'm going to remove some of the shielding from the center conductor. I found, and I don't know how well this will show up, but leaving that much width, the width of that part, really seems to have worked for me in doing this. Might be a better way to do it, but that's what has kind of worked for me. So we got that off. Same thing, I'm going to twist those wires nice and tight. So then we need to tin both of these. Now I use this, I picked up this thing off Amazon, the old third-hand ones that they have, the really cheap ones, I found that they were more of a struggle than they were beneficial. So I picked up this one that cost a little bit more money, but man, I'll tell you what, for the price and it's been really nice to have. So I'm going to stick those in there and then tin them. So a little bit of heat and a little bit of solder. All right. So now we'll do the right angle first, and then we'll do the straight plug. And like I said, these are just like some things that I found that work for me. This ends up being, you know, that inside conductor I think ends up being a little bit long. So I'm going to clip that. You can see that. It's pretty short. And so the trick that I found with these is if you bend both of the little things up, to start, and we go in from the side here and then wrap it so that ground goes down under the other one. And then I'm going to go back and bend that one back down. And I'm going to push this one down too. That actually holds it in there pretty tight, which makes it nice when you go to solder because you don't have to fight to keep the wire in place. So I'm going to stick that in the third hand. And let's do that. And then, of course, do kind of a quick visual inspection. And it looks good. So then to finish this side up, and notice a couple things to notice, you know, the outside jacket here, we want to make sure we need to leave enough on there that it's still sitting, because when we put this back on, we fold that down and put the back on, we want that to pinch over that outside jacket, and that's what kind of holds it in place. So let me stick these in real quick. All right, so now let's do the barrel plug. So I had to push these back together because remember, we got to stick this through and make sure that's on the cable before we go any further. Okay, so I actually went back and trimmed that a little bit more, took just a little bit more off the inside conductor wire and trimmed a little bit off that lead. And we'll see if that makes it just a little bit easier. Because what we're trying to do here is push the ground through, and then at the same time, so you can see I pushed that inside conductor through and just kind of bend it a little bit. And then, but I want to kind of keep the ground over as close as I can to the other side and keep it straight. So I'm going to put that in here, my third hand. And I'm going to solder that ground lead first. And then I'm going to check that. That looks good. And now I'm going to push, because it was like that, I'm going to push the ground over here, trying to get the ground as far away from that as we can. And I'm going to put that back in here. And I found having that second one up here to kind of hold the wire out of the way, where you want it, but out of the way, really is kind of helpful for me. Now, we don't need all that extra ground wire sticking out. So then I'm just going back. I find it easier to leave it on there and go back and clip it. That's probably not the best form, but that works for me. So then we're gonna bring our outside down. There is a little piece of plastic in the outside that we can push over top of that. And then bring the housing down and screw it on. And then again, we're gonna screw those into the insulation. And that's what provides that stress relief and holds it tight. So we picked up one of these Behringer plugs, cable testers, plug both sides in, hit the reset button. That little X shows us that the cable's good. Jiggle it around. If it was intermittent, one of these would light up and it would show you where what's not working right. So that's building the cable real quick. Then the TRS cables, if I pop these two screws out real quick. The inside of this one looks pretty similar. The one we were just doing, except now you have 3 spots. The ground's still over here. And then here are 2 wires, because TRS will have 2 wires in it. Doesn't matter which goes which, just as long as you always do it the same, right? So whatever you connect to the tip, if you do, say it's red, if you do red to the tip, you gotta do red on the other side, right? You can't cross the wires. As long as you do them the same, you're gonna be all right. All right, and then I guess, wait, one more. The SPS6S, which is the barrel TRS. I haven't had to use this one. I don't know how well you're gonna be able to tell this, but that center is just like a little divot, you know, like I haven't had to do it yet. So I'm a little worried about that, but I think I'll be able to figure it out. You know, I'll give it a shot here when I get a chance. All right, so that's the square plugs that I used in this build. Are soldered cables better than solderless? You know, I don't know. There's a lot of people that argue about that. I think both are great. I used to use the solderless cables a long time ago, for a long time. I personally find them to be more of a pain to put together than actually doing this. So take that for what you will. And I had more of them fail, but you know, it just might be that I wasn't good at putting them together. So anyway, I don't think this is hard. Great Saturday afternoon activity maybe. And I know that when I look at my board and know that I soldered all those connections, there's a certain amount of like self-satisfaction or pride in that. So give it a shot, try it out, solder some cables and see what you think. I'm still learning, so if you have any tips or tricks, leave them down in the comments. I'd be happy to hear them and would appreciate the constructive feedback. So with that, Pedalboard's coming up soon. We got one more little update after this.